Is everyone... We're missing a couple of people, but hopefully... Oh, good. Excellent. All right, so now we'll move to the amendments, and we've got a number of amendments. Oh, do you need that long-term plan, the resolution to be... Okay, but just we'll just put it up on the main board if we could, that in moving the Mayor's recommendations, we omitted to move all of the other elements of the long-term plan, which could have been challenging in many respects. So, that is now formally moved by myself and the Deputy Mayor, moved and seconded. So that's on the table. So the next... No, it doesn't. Oh, yeah, I'll put it now. All those in favour say... It was a good try. It was a good try when no one was looking. Okay, so, and now we're going to move to the amendments. Now, of course, the amendments have been coming in, came in through to the 12th of June, and we've put them out for staff comment, and, there's still some confusion around some of the aspects of it, and, well, not confusion, but further questions that people have around certain particular ones. So we're going to try and structure the amendments so that we can really debate some of these issues that have relevance across the long-term plan, and even though they pick up specific recommendations that have been highlighted by councillors and often picking up on what was said during the LTP submissions process, this gives us an opportunity to actually line up with different line up these different issues for debate as part of this process. So the first resolution, the first amendment that we will deal with is this one, and it's moved by Andrew Turner and seconded by... who was going to second that one? Phil Clearwater. So I will open this up for debate. Thank you.
Great. So this is an amendment that I'm very happy to be moving. This represents the culmination of some conversations that have been going on in Robinsons Bay for some time between the Reserves Management Committee and the Robinsons Bay Residents and Ratepayers Association, and it relates to two key assets in Robinsons Bay, one of which is the Robinsons Bay Reserve and the other of which is the Robinsons Bay Wharf. And the community, the wider community, in fact, almost to a resident of the community, are keen to have both of these assets cared for in the best possible way. So we have funds on budget for the Robinsons Bay Reserves Management Committee to create a car parking area for the reserve, which is essential in terms of the role of that reserve as an educational teaching reserve. And we don't have funds on budget for the Robinsons Bay Wharf. Now, I attended a meeting in Robinsons Bay of a number of concerned community members where there was a very open conversation about how the funding which is on budget for Robinsons Bay could be used almost as match funding for volunteer labour that the community would be willing to give to both of these projects. There's significant capability within that community, engineering capability, hands-on physical labour abilities there as well. So what the community are doing are essentially saying, Council, you've put a certain amount of funds on budget for Robinsons Bay. It happens to be tagged to the reserve. We have engineering and other capabilities within the community that we want to bring to the party. We want to stretch that funding and share it, in fact, across the reserve and the wharf. So this relates very neatly to comments that the Mayor made in her opening address this morning around partnering with communities to deliver best outcomes. What you actually end up with, or what we actually end up with, in fact, what the community ends up with, is two assets within that community that the community members feel a very strong sense of ownership of, in as much as they've been involved with the repair and maintenance of those facilities. So all that we're asking to do by way of this amendment, all I'm asking to do is to essentially spread the funds that are on budget for the reserve across the reserve and the wharf, so that the two community groups can work together using resources in the community, bringing their volunteer labour and expertise to the party in order to deliver both. Now, we have a staff response, and the staff response is yes to repairs, which is great, yes to volunteers working on the car park, which is fantastic, no to volunteers working on the jetty, and that disappoints me. This is something that we've been talking about in the context of a number of community facilities, probably since about the day after the earthquakes. It's something I've been banging on about in a number of contexts for probably the best part of 4 or 5 years. And we really need to find a way through this. When we've got capability in a community, when we've got willingness in a community, we've got a community that are willing to step up and make these things happen, council need to find a way to work through, yes, the health and safety aspects and the other compliance aspects, but to say volunteers may not do this work because of these constraints. We need to look at this from the other end, and we need to say, here we've got community volunteers wanting to do the work, how can we enable that to happen, rather than saying council needs to do this, because in point of fact we haven't done it in terms of the wharf. We haven't got budget to do it. There's no budget on the plan to do it. We've got a community that have come to us with a solution. We need to find a way of embracing that solution and allowing these community assets to be brought back to the standard that they need to be at, and we need to respect the fact that the community are willing and able to do that.
No? I'll put the amendment. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you very much. The next amendment that we want to look at. Sorry, my computer's not showing up here, so I'm going to go off another computer, so I'm just always going to check to see if it's up there. And I understand that Vicky Buck is wanting to move this, and Pauline Cotter to second it. So if I can invite Councillor Buck to speak to the amendment.
Just in terms of what we heard in the submissions, one of the things that came through incredibly strongly was the demand and desire for community facilities to be repaired, and particularly for the need for facilities where people felt great about being there, and the need for some temporary facilities because of the delay on the Metro Sports Centre. So we have at Whoronui an indoor sports facility which is currently closed, but which can be repaired at a maximum cost of 2.4 million, but maybe substantially below that. We also heard from a group of parents from Avebury about Avebury Park's paddling pool, how important it was for that community. We've done up the house, reopened in September 2013, beautiful house there. And what we heard from both the community there and the CDHB in terms of the health benefits actually of paddling pools. So the suggestion is that in tranche 2 of the community repairs, money that's already approved, we substitute out the repair of the Milton Street depot, upon which we had no submissions, or none that I'm aware of, and I think I've read every single one, and substitute the 2.98 million that is currently on budget to allow for the repair and reopening of Whoronui Recreation Centre and the repair or rebuild of Avebury Park paddling pool. Obviously there's a bit of work to be done on both of those, but we know roughly the cost, and we can fit both of those facilities into the current allocated cost. So I'm happy to move.
Very good. Is anyone opposed to that wants to speak? I'll put... No, so I mean, I made it clear that the amendments would be dealt with by way of, if there was, people would speak in favour of it, I would look for somebody to speak against it, and if that wasn't forthcoming, I'd put the motion. So I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. The next amendment is in relation to the Sydenham Church remains, and I think Tim Scandrett's going to move that. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Jamie? Tim?
Thank you. This has been going on ever since the church was demolished under emergency powers. There have been a number of two tests on the site which have been totally inconclusive and almost contradict each other. So the trust is in a quandary of actually how much this will actually cost to clear. Council a long time ago agreed and arranged and still has this in place to store the heritage assets, whether they be the rock or whatever is found, because apparently it was demolished, if the term is actually can be used, sensitively. And they are hoping that a lot of their items, such as pews, etc., will still be intact, which let's hope they are. But it's been over 4 years, and weather, etc. So irrelevant of the cost, irrelevant of who's working with who, nothing has happened yet. This is a crucial gateway to the central city. It was a tourist roadway prior to the earthquake. There's no question it will be that again. And for this community, there's been a huge amount of development in here. They've been paying a lot into that community. And at the south end, we've got the Sydenham site, which is going to be developed. We've had this site, which has been just going on. We now have Enviro Waste at the other end, where prior to that we had Scully's. So this is a community that's put up with a lot. To back this and say we will underwrite and get this done will be a huge boost in supporting the Sydenham Master Plan and this community. So I urge you to support it. Thank you.
Actually, before I called you, I should have asked if we were able to get some advice on the cost.
Well, that's what I've said. There's no, if there is no asbestos, then it could be 150 or so, and that could be covered by the trust. If there is asbestos, it could be $1 million. We don't know, but I'm presuming it won't be that. But how long's a piece of string? We've had 2 tests, and I can't understand why they've been inconclusive. Why do a test at all? It's insane.
Jane.
We've asked a question about the cost, so if we could we leave that one up there and we can give you the answer shortly.
I'm actually, sorry, this has been going on for 4 years. We've had staff working on it. It's going on and on and on. And this community is over.
Yeah, but here's Anne now, so... Anne, Superwoman.
Timing's everything.
And there's been, considerable frustration expressed about the lack of clearance at Sydenham Church site and the remains of the church that have remained there for some time. And I think that you've got a really good history of the site. It was demolished under the Sarah regime that was in place at the time, wasn't it? And
it was demolished under the civil defence emergency legislation.
Right, so it was before Sarah?
Absolutely, it was demolished about the 24th or 25th of February.
And
it was in the days afterwards.
Did it have to go through a process? Because I'm just wondering how the demolition occurred without the removal from the site.
No, it was demolished to make safe. So that was the undertaking. There was an investigation done at the time around who gave the authorisation and everything, and I haven't got those details here in front of me, but I know one of our guys did do that, and the right people made the right decision, although, I shouldn't say the right decision, the right people who had the authority to make the decision did do that. So
right,
yeah.
But safe and unsightly are 2 different things, and
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So. Perhaps if you give us an overview and then I'll take some questions.
Okay, so we've had a look at it from an environmental health perspective and from a regulatory perspective. So there's actually no mechanism for us to actually require them to remove it under the regulatory rules and regulations. There was an issue in relation to managing asbestos on the site. So the church was working, or the trust was working with Sarah, and Sarah did some testing for them, and the testing came back showing that there was asbestos contamination within the rubble site itself. And we spoke with the trust about that, and the trust organised to have the site actually covered in a clear coating to avoid the asbestos contamination getting into the air from an environmental health perspective and making it safe. So that's as far as we went from a environmental health perspective. There's another side to this, and it's to do with the arrangements around the insurance and the fact that council, as I understand it, previously provided a grant to the trust to undertake a whole lot of the renovation work. So there's an outstanding sum of money that and some insurance documents that have gone to the trust to sign that would actually enable them to carry on and remove the rubble themselves. It's all about the money. Yes, so that's where that's at. That's why we haven't moved with regulatory powers to actually require it to be released. There is ongoing contention with the trust about the fact that there is no asbestos in the site and they can't understand where it's come from. We did an investigation, actually there was some allegations that came from a nearby roof. You can't establish where the asbestos has come from. There's quite clearly photos showing pieces of polite within that rubble. Where it came from and the source of that is very difficult. The fact is that it's actually in there now, and that's the rubble will need to be managed as if it's asbestos contaminated. So that adds a lot of cost too to that site. The trust actually want to remove the stone and everything and take it somewhere else, clean it, take it somewhere else so that they can actually utilise it potentially in the future to rebuild. There's also some important items within the rubble that they'd like to recover as part of that process.
Right. So have you got an idea of the cost?
It hasn't been discussed specifically. I can tell you though, on previous experience where we had to deal with the Wainoni Road House of Horrors, that state house that was dropped, that cost $60,000 to remove and get rid of because of the asbestos contamination. This is maybe perhaps slightly different because we're not actually removing the material, that would have to be cleaned and dealt with in an appropriate way. Okay. Particularly in storage.
Thank you. Yanni and Jamie and Pauline.
You guys are on an email received in March on this, which pretty much has all the same information. What was outstanding in March was that we were waiting for two things. We're waiting for a business case for the development of a community facility, and also that there was going to be some clearance plan, but you were saying that none of those things have...
I'm not sure about the business case. I don't know where that business case... It's privately owned land. It belongs to the trust, and it's theirs to do with what they want. So I'm not sure where the business case was going. In terms of the clearance of the rubble, the church was going to, once they'd made a decision to clear it, were going to provide us with an action plan on how they were going to manage the site from asbestos contaminated, do the appropriate thing. In terms of removing that rubble to wherever they needed to take it. So there's no requirement from us to have a clearance plan other than to show that when they do come to clear it, that it's being cleared appropriately from an environmental health perspective.
But as I understand, we're waiting for those church heritage trustees to come up with the asbestos removal plan or the debris removal plan.
Yes.
That incorporates. So we've got no idea how much that will cost, and we don't have any time frames. Have we had any recent contact with them over where they're at?
I haven't. I'm not sure whether the property team have.
And just the second question for me is, have we talked to the people that actually demolished it to find out what materials they demolished? Given that my understanding is an operator that we use, and we do have dealings with this operator in the past.
Talk to the demolition contractor to see
yeah,
what...
my understanding was it was Southern Demolition, I think, that demolished it, and there was all this confusion, and I think they were also involved in a Weka pit, but it may be worth just talking to them to say, when you demolished it, was there anything else that was put in, and whether the asbestos, where it came.
I don't know, actually, if that's going to be helpful, Yanni. The building was dropped on the site as it was, and I don't think anything else has been introduced. So potentially from the demolition contractor. That is not to say that somebody hasn't dumped pieces of polite later, which we see and has happened across the red zone. Anywhere where there's an opportunity, people will do that. So the fact of the matter is that there is clear asbestos contamination on this site, and it needs to be managed accordingly, and that does increase the cost.
But it's really the cost of who pays for that. That's the issue. That's holding things up.
The asbestos contamination?
Yeah.
Well, actually, it would fall back to the owner, the landowner, and the person responsible for the clearance of the site.
Is it useful for us to specify up to a certain amount, or?
I think that's a very good idea, and I'm sitting up here not just to keep Anne company, but to understand the way in which you might want to fund this and to what level, because the way that this looks to me is it would have to be ratepayer funding, and so that the level to which you underwrite it will have to build into the budgets.
Yep, sorry.
There was a second test done in the exact same spots where the first test was done, and it was inconclusive with regards to the asbestos was on the surface. So when the trust came to our community board, we said, well, we've got two tests. One's saying there is asbestos on the surface. The other one is saying that it hasn't found asbestos further into the site. The fact of the matter is we need an absolute test to tell us exactly what's there, so we can then go forward and work out what it's going to cost or thereabouts.
Well, if the lack of knowledge is holding us up, I mean,
the trust.
let's get on with it.
The trust is undertaking that. They're also undertaking at this stage the action plan to clear the site, but it comes back to, and Peter just alluded to it, they will not be able to cover the cost if there is asbestos. Right. If there is no asbestos, the price that was given probably won't be there anymore, but Southern Demolition did give quite a reasonable price.
Yeah. I've got questions, Jamie and then Pauline.
I'm glad Peter and Yanni alluded to that, just because the first thing I was thinking is we do want action and an outcome, but I also think that when you make a resolution, you need to be cognizant of, or at least making sure that you're finding ways to mitigate any potential risks. And the fact that it doesn't specify a figure or an up to figure, I think is a risk from council's perspective. So the two suggestions I had was, one, do we put a limit of, say, up to $100,000, or I'll take expert advice on that. And I think there's a second part to it, which is to provide, or that the trust provides their own financial contribution of equal or more than the council's potential underwrite. You know, we don't want to see us just solely picking up the tab. If they come to the party, I think it's a good thing that we're there to help, and if there's a shortfall, we can underwrite it, so long it's up to an acceptable level. But limiting that level, and also saying that we want or would expect them to put in a financial contribution at least as much as ours. Just an idea. I just wanted to ask if.
Well,
I know the trusts, I think it's $412 with the grant, $412,000 I think the grant was for. The insurance, I think, is around $350. So if the trust, if it's whatever it is to fix the site, they're still into the council for an amount. They put all the insurance to pay off as much of the grant as possible, they'll still be in the red. Then we're left with a trust that's in debt to the council, and nothing has happened to the site. So we're going around in circles.
No, so let's just allude to those.
Pauline and then Glenn.
My question was just wanting clarification on that grant, and I think you mentioned it, Anne. So was that pre-earthquake for redevelop for?
Yes, I think it was used to do some earthquake strengthening work on the building.
And it wasn't spent on that?
It was. No, the money was spent.
Oh, it was spent. Thank you. That's what I want.
Yeah, Glenn?
Thank you. My inclination at this point really is to seek a report. I couldn't support that because this is half-baked. We actually need to know the insurance and asbestos implications. It doesn't contain any facts or figures. Yeah, but that's really a debating point. So okay, right. We'll definitely have a debate on this one, since there's obviously going to be someone opposed to it. But I'm just... Yeah, I mean, Yanni's updated us with this information, and you've got that the council's still providing advice to them about best practice, but best practice would be
for the site to be cleared in a way that manages the presence of asbestos because of the conflicting tests?
Absolutely, and you've got a test there. So the tests that were done by Sarah were by a reputable tester who's established it under a set of methodology, or a particular methodology to do that. I understand that the second test might not have followed such good best practice methodology. The fact is, and we've spoken to WorkSafe about this, because a contractor would be in to do it, so it's a workplace.
Yep.
The fact that there is asbestos in there doesn't mean you could have several tests later that show it's inconclusive. There are tests that clearly show there is presence of asbestos, therefore it must be managed in that way.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter that the asbestos arrived pre or post the building coming down.
It's there, and the photos of the asbestos pole lights sitting in there, there's big chunks of it, so it's not like we're just looking at little fibres.
Right.
It has to be managed as if there is asbestos in there. That's the right way to do it. It's in a public place. It needs to be managed in that way.
So what is because there is no question that everyone wants it removed. Mm-hmm. No question. Very high up in the government as well. I've had conversations with various people and very keen to see this go. We are of one mind. So what can we as a council best do that would facilitate? Is underwriting the best option, or is it really to... because there's nobody that lives in that area that wants to leave it there. Tim's absolutely right. It's holding back the whole concept of the master plan and the vision for Sydenham. And I go there to shop now. I never used to go to Sydenham to shop. That fantastic development at the Colombo, it's brilliant. Some of my favourite shops are there. It's such a fantastic place, and I just hate to see something like this holding back really the whole development of the area. Yanni.
Because the other obvious thing for me, right, is that the building wasn't demolished with the owner's consent. It was someone signed off on it at an official level, and it got demolished. So as part of the kind of response emergency costs, surely the disposal of the material should be captured in some sort of civil defence emergency budget, given that, the other argument that these people may have is that, well, we didn't consent to it being demolished, we didn't know about it, and now you're making us pay for cleaning up the mess that wasn't our decision, and B, has got stuff that we don't think was in here. So I would have thought if we're trying to find funding for it, the logical thing would come out of one of those emergency response budgets. But I presume we've paid for a whole bunch of stuff.
I think, Yanni, that might apply if the building was dropped and disposed of, but it wasn't. It was dropped for safety reasons. It was left there and retained there. It hasn't been disposed of. It remains on site, so therefore it still belongs to the property, the trust. So I don't think that there would have been any way of recovery. We can't recover costs that we haven't actually spent under that legislation. That wasn't disposed of. It was just dropped for public safety reasons. So the costs for Southern Demolition undertaking that work's probably been paid for as part of the civil defence emergency, but there would be no costs associated with disposal because it stayed there on site.
Phil?
And I just wanted to perhaps clarify the possibility of that any asbestos being only surface, based on I understand that the building, since the old church was built in the late 1800s, asbestos then wasn't used, and therefore is it more likely, in fact, it would just be any asbestos would be just on the surface layer?
I think we have to step away from the construction. We actually have to look at it. The asbestos is present. I cannot tell you how it got there. I don't know. There was sizable pieces of pole light there. It was visually obvious, which, if you thought it was just wind blown off other sites, you wouldn't necessarily see the visual pieces. The fact is it's present and we have to deal with it in that way. The right thing to do is deal with it as asbestos contamination. The Wainoni Road situation had asbestos contamination in there too, and that was because it was all in the soffits. So we had to deal with it. We didn't know that until after the fire had occurred and the building had been demolished or dropped by the fire service. So sometimes you just have to deal with it there. Yeah.
Just a quick question, just to double confirm, Anne, so it's the status of it, it's friable asbestos that we would be most likely dealing with?
Yes, so particle board that's been, polite that's been broken shows friable asbestos. That's why we got them to put the covering over there to protect the public safety from more health in relation to any friable asbestos that came off those broken parts.
All right, so...
I'd like to bring it back to the extent to which you'd like ratepayers to underwrite this, and also the precedent effect of other aspects that might come in as well. I think that's something that you want to take into mind as you're considering it.
Well, they are huge issues, and there is no question that everyone wants it cleared, but it's owned by a trust that, as Yanni points out, didn't ask for it to be demolished. The people who made the decision to demolish it were authorised to make that decision, and that was the decision they made. Mm-hmm. The rubble remains on the property, but it isn't ordinary rubble. It's affected by contamination with asbestos, regardless of how it got there. It's there, and therefore the whole site has to be treated in a particular way for the protection of those workers that will be invited to do that work. So it is what it is, and we're dealing with a trust that doesn't have a lot of resources. In fact, owes us more money than they will spend in insurance. So
I think just from Peter's point about the setting a precedent, the fact that this was insured by the City Council, I think, is probably probably where the precedent starts and ends.
Yeah, so it only applies when we insure for you.
Are there any others, just by the way?
I believe there's quite a few properties that we've insured on behalf of.
And are there any that are sitting there?
I don't know that level of detail.
Yeah. But it may well be that we've got to...
I appreciate the need to put boundaries around it, and I appreciate the need to put a dollar figure on it, I think.
I support clearing up this site. I think we have to, but I just wonder whether we're actually doing this around the wrong way. What we should do getting a report back on how much it'll cost, what the plan is, and what the future facility is going to be. And we try and get that, and I'm happy to put money into it, given the unique situation, as has been said, that I don't think there'd be many other buildings that were demolished without the owner's knowledge, and then left for 5 years to rot and deteriorate and have all this kind of kerfuffle, and we insure it. So, but I do think we should actually, in terms of process, get a really clear understanding of what's being proposed to be done and how much it's going to cost.
Well, given that was kind of the position earlier this year, and actually before we were elected in September 2013, what sort of time frame would we put on that sort of report if we really wanted to get action?
To understand the costs and what could happen, and I'd say if you gave 8 weeks would probably, well, depends on when you want it back here, but it would take, we need to talk to the trust, we need to get some contractors in there, need to understand where it needs to go. It's not just disposing of it, it's actually where does it go after it's taken off site.
And storage.
How does it get cleaned, all of those sorts of things. So it is quite a unique situation because we're wanting to retain some of the material there.